moving from the humorous to the catastrophic, I realize I don't want to give anyone whiplash here, but I have an idea. It's not my idea. It comes from a person named Mimi Kennedy. She's a writer at commondreams.org. If you haven't gone to that website, you really should. They put together some very, very insightful writing and, accumulating pieces written by folks who are not associated with Common Dreams. But their staff of, I guess they're freelancers or independent writers, is especially good. commondreams.org. And what she wrote, and it appeared in today's edition of Common Dreams, is very contemporary. It's right now, it's immediate, because she's referencing the situation on college campuses now. Those situations are increasing exponentially with the student demonstrations, the student arrests, the inability of college or university administrations to figure out what the hell to do. And usually when that happens, they do the wrong thing. That's just the nature of a bureaucracy. And there's no more clear definition of a bureaucracy than the administration of a university or a college, right? But unless it's the military. But Mimi has an idea, which after reading her piece, I agree. And she points out the inability of us citizens in this country, even a majority of us, to have any influence at all on our country's policies of war or peace in an effective way. The fact that we don't have any influence has long been obvious. It's obvious to you. I'm sure it's obvious to me. I've said it a million times on this podcast. Where it concerns global warming, what the hell can I do? Yeah, I can write letters to my member of Congress. I can demonstrate. I can march down Central Park West in New York City a couple of years ago with 500,000 other people. And what good does it do? Anyway, she points out an example, the support by the United States for Israel's war in Gaza has made painfully obvious that we don't, as individuals, have any influence whatsoever on our government. This government, we don't. And it's now become perilous, is the point she's making. Here's what she said. Let me quote this directly. The U.S. stands before the world as an accomplice to Israel's flagrant violation of international law in Gaza. Yet Congress continues to pass aid because so many of our legislators and their constituents and donors cannot turn their backs on our ally for valid reasons of historical memory and conscience. Okay. So far, so good. I mean, you don't turn your back on your ally. When your ally or your friend, reduce it from the global to the personal, when your friend, all of a sudden you notice that he or she is starting to experiment with meth or some weird fucking drug, and you know it's going to happen, you don't turn your back on them. You try to help them see what's going to happen. And granted, when you're dealing with addiction or drug use or alcoholism, 9 times out of 10, you are not seen as a help. You are seen as a pain in the ass to the user. Been there. I know what I'm talking about. So, Mimi comes up with a good idea. She says it's time to create an escrow account for further aid to Israel. With such an account, she writes, we can still show support for our ally, but the aid will not be released until the UN certifies that Israel is in compliance with international law regarding the treatment of civilians in Gaza. I mean, what a great idea, right? Continue. I mean, the U.S. Congress, Biden just signed into law today, I believe, the so-called foreign aid bill that includes billions for Israel. Was it 19 billion for Israel, 1 billion for so-called humanitarian aid to the 2 million people in Gaza. I will be curious to see how and when that particular aid finally gets to the citizens of that now demolished place on earth. But Mimi points out that a lot of folks would argue, and with reason, that the UN is likely to certify Israel as being in any way compliant with international law, especially given what has occurred since the horrific attack on Israeli citizens last October. But any disputes that Israel has with UN member states has got to be worked out in the UN. I mean, that's allegedly what the UN, part of their mission, is to try to dissolve these kinds of disagreements and arguments and misunderstandings before they turn into what is happening in Israel. The UN admitted Israel as a member back in 1949. They were established as a state in 1948, so it didn't take long. And our country, the United States, we can help as a go-between on the one hand, Israel, on the other hand, the UN. But not in an atmosphere where Joe Biden's warnings to Netanyahu to avoid some of the mistakes that we made after the 9/11 tragedy in this country has been, by Netanyahu, so violently ignored. The suggestions, the admonitions, the statements, the warnings that have come from Biden. And they have not been unequivocal. They have not been as direct as I think they should. Telling a country that is hell-bent on destroying an entire population, which is what Netanyahu and the ultra-Orthodox rabbis who run the government in Israel now, that is exactly what their ultimate goal is. To eliminate, erase, disappear Palestinians. That has been written about by Israeli authors, Jewish American authors. That has been written about over and over and over again from the Israeli standpoint, from the Jewish standpoint of, yes, they must go. Get them out of our land. So I think what Biden is trying to convince Netanyahu of not doing is what we did where it concerned Iraq. If you remember, Iraq was tragically a sidebar to the 9/11 attack on this country. First, we invaded Afghanistan for the purpose of eliminating training camps. Please keep in mind the very obvious here, and that is that every terrorist directly involved in the attack on the U.S. Back in 2001, the trade towers, every single one of those conspirators died instantly, along with the 3,000 people that they had murdered. So who were we going after in Afghanistan? We were going after the plotters and planners, and the person whom we were told was the originator of the entire idea, plot, planning, and execution. That was Osama bin Laden. And it took a number of years to get him after several thousand Americans had died in combat. God knows how many Afghans died in combat. And then all of a sudden, George W. Bush, being the ignorant little savage that he is and was at the time, he ordered an invasion of Iraq. Iraq. One of the most secular of the states in the Middle East, or the Near East, Iraq. And as a result of that, you remember shock and awe on the night that the United States launched more bombs against Iraq than had been launched against any of our adversaries in World War II. And there it was, live on CNN. You remember? And as a result, I don't know who you're going to believe, but what I have discovered is as many as 2 million Iraqis died. Civilians. They were not part of the military in Iraq. One of the first things that the U.S. did after that invasion was to disband, to totally shred the Iraqi military. And as a result, look what has happened. Look at what has happened for the past quarter century, almost, in Iraq. Iran now controls enough of the territory of Iraq that they feel confident in launching attacks against Israel, the United States, whomever, or our interests anyway, from Iraq. But I'm starting to digress, so let me pull it back to what I'm trying to say. Biden was trying to make the point to Netanyahu, you are going too goddamn far. You are slaughtering civilians. We slaughtered civilians. You've got to stop. And Netanyahu more or less told Biden to go fuck himself, which is what Netanyahu or any dictator's attitude is. That's what Trump's attitude is. Putin, Modi in India, Erdogan in Turkey. This is what they all say. Fuck you. This is my country. I will slaughter as many people as I feel like slaughtering. And you can't do anything about it because this is an internal matter. That's what the Chinese government said after the Tiananmen Square massacre. And to this day, to the second, the world has no idea how many Chinese citizens were killed in that horror in 1989, was it? Anyway, back in this country and back in this time and back to the United States, Israel, congressional majorities in this country continue to pass aid to Israel. Okay, then let the escrow account satisfy the needs of our ally, but at the same time signal that the United States is refusing to comply any longer with the collective murder of people in Gaza. How many children now? What's the latest number? 18,000? 20,000? Kids, little kids, blown to pieces. And what about the blockade, keeping medicine, keeping drinkable water, keeping food away from the people of Gaza who are now on the edge of famine? The planned starvation is exactly what this is. Don't think for a second that this is an unexpected byproduct of this war. This is a deliberate action on the part of the Israeli government. Starve them to death. Let them get sick and die from lack of medicine or lack of surgically necessary equipment to save their lives using surgery. Let them fucking die. And the indiscriminate bombing. That's what we have to let the world know. We're not going to, and we have to let each other know, we're not going to participate in this anymore. This is exactly what the students in this country are demonstrating against, is this starvation, indiscriminate bombing, collective punishment, blockades, slaughter. And for that, we're going to say to students in this country, well, we're going to arrest you if you don't break this shit up. What? This idea that the right of self-defense is absolutely a bedrock principle that Israel and any country comes up with that. So, okay, then let Israel now respect that same right of self-defense for our country. Here's what we have to defend ourselves against right now. The indictment and prosecution as an accomplice to these war crimes that Israel is committing. Mimi Kennedy writes, our aid to Israel can be sequestered in an escrow account until it will not be used to commit such violations. And again, I think this is an idea of why hasn't the government of the United States, maybe they have, but why hasn't the government of the United States made this a public potential position? So as these congressional majorities, for whatever reason, continue to legislate more money for Israel, then the escrow account could signal U.S. refusal to comply with this slaughter, this genocide that's occurring in Gaza, at the same time, continue to support Israel. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.